Today on Sports Central, we'll be going over our next final prediction of this 2020 offseason, and it will be over the South Carolina Gamecocks. And this is a team that went 4-8 in 2019, bit of a disappointment of a season compared to how many expected it to be. But whether or not they can make it to a bowl game and improve in 2020 is what we're going over here today. We'll be going over a few players that this team will be losing and returning, along with a full preview and prediction on every single game in South Carolina's schedule for next season. So with that, let's look at your season trends from 2019 for South Carolina. They were 3-5 between September and October, as well as 1-3 between November and the postseason. So this was a pretty inconsistent team last season. They did have a couple of decent wins in there, though. They had a big win over Charleston Southern, 72-10, and I don't care what team you're playing. I mean, that was a very impressive win by South Carolina. I mean, to beat a team by 62, very impressive. They also had a good win over Kentucky, 24-7 at the end of September, followed by a win against Georgia on the road, 20-17, and that certainly was the signature win of the season for South Carolina. I mean, that was one of the best games in general for the entire season last year. So yeah, that Georgia win was huge for South Carolina, and honestly, that crushed Georgia's college football playoff hopes in that game. I mean, if Georgia would have won that, I think the odds of them making it into the college football playoff would be much higher. As far as your returning production goes, you return their starting quarterback, Ryan Helinski, which he had a big part of this team last season. He had just right around 2,400 yards with 11 touchdowns and 5 interceptions last season. So he did have a decent amount of yardage, but his interception and touchdown ratio was not very good. He was a bit of an inaccurate quarterback as well. So that is certainly something that he needs to fix up, which I think if he does, I definitely think Ryan Helinski could be a big quarterback in the SEC next season. But until that happens, I don't really expect much out of him. But he definitely does have a lot of upside as a quarterback. As far as the running back situation goes for South Carolina, it really does not look very good. You return all three of your top running backs in Tavian Feaster, Rico Dowdle, and Mon Deason, which, of course, Rico Dowdle and Tavian Feaster were two very big parts of this team. They combined for nearly 1,400 yards combined, and they had 9 touchdowns as well. So both running backs did put up a lot of yardage. And, I mean, Mon Deason also had a decent part of this team with having just right around 300 yards of offense last season. So, I mean, he was a big part of this team too, and this running back core is certainly something that I'd be watching out for next season. As far as the receiving core goes, they do lose their top wide receiver in Brian Edwards, which he had just right over 800 yards with 6 touchdowns last season, and they also returned their second running back in Shee Smith, which he had just right around 500 yards with 2 touchdowns last season. So for the receiving core, you also lose your top tight end, Kyle Markway. So overall, you're losing 2 of your top receivers, and that does concern me a little bit for South Carolina. And the thing is that's crazy is South Carolina's returning production was actually really good heading into 2019. That's why I expected them to be so good. I mean, I expected them to have 7 or 8 wins last season, and for them to go 4-8, I think it's kind of a missed opportunity for the South Carolina team. I mean, they had Ryan Helinski at quarterback. They had 3 pretty good running backs, and the receiving core also looked pretty good heading into 2019. So once again, a bit of a disappointment of a season, and to see them lose all the talent that they are, it does concern me once again. As far as the offensive line goes, they lose 1 on there. They also lose 2 defensive linemen and 2 linebackers. So, I mean, overall, this offense may have some troubles, but the defense looks pretty good otherwise. They only lose 4 starters, which that's pretty average out of most teams to lose 4 starters on some side of the ball. But the chances of making a bowl game for South Carolina next season, that is a big question for this team, and I'm sure most fans are kind of wondering that. And it's a tough say right now. We're still pretty early on, but I'd say South Carolina has a decent chance of making it. I would not say it's very great, though. I mean, when you go 4-8 with a decent setup on both sides of the ball last season, I mean, that does concern me a lot, especially losing basically your top running back core as well as 2 of your biggest receivers and your receiving core. So that does concern me a little bit for South Carolina, but I do think this team does have potential. I mean, especially with Ryan Helinski, if he can have a good season, I think South Carolina could, in general, make it to a bowl game. It would not surprise me if that did happen. And at least, I mean, their schedule is not as bad as it was last season. I mean, they had a brutal schedule last season, but it still will not be easy next season. As you can see, here's your schedule for next season. You do have an easier setup in September, so that's good. You got 2 easy games to start off with Central Carolina and East Carolina. And then you got Missouri at home as well. So you're at home until September 26th when you got Kentucky on the road, followed by a brutal test at Florida. Then you got Tennessee at home, followed by Texas A&M also at home after your bye week. And then you finish off October at Vanderbilt. As far as your November goes, you got a absolutely brutal November. You got Georgia, LSU, and Clemson within 4 weeks. So this South Carolina schedule is still really tough next season. I wouldn't say it's as tough as last season by any means, but I would say it still has got a lot of tough games in here. And here's what I'm expecting out of your September 1st. I can go 4-0 through September, so this team is looking really good heading into the rest of the months. Of course, I think Coastal Carolina and East Carolina are both really easy wins. I think both of those you're going to win by more than 14 points. However, I do expect those Missouri and Kentucky games to be a bit tougher. I think those will be tough wins, close wins, but you do get it done in the end. As far as your October goes, I think I'm going to put you at 1-3. I think Florida, Tennessee, and Texas A&M are all going to be great teams next season, especially Florida. And so I think in the Swamp you take your first loss, and then Tennessee, a team that's on the rise, will beat you at home. Same thing with Texas A&M. They're also a team to watch out for. So I think you lose 3 straight there. However, you do get a win at Vanderbilt, which puts you at 5-3 heading into November. So basically, for South Carolina to make a bowl game next season, they got to win 1 of their last 4. And I do expect them to do that. I do expect them to lose all 3 of the rest of them. I mean, Georgia, LSU, and Clemson, those 3 teams were 3 of the top teams in the nation last season. You got to play them within 4 weeks. It's just going to be really tough. You also have to play LSU in Death Valley, as well as Clemson in a really tough location. So, yeah, for South Carolina, I don't think they'll win any of those games. I don't really expect a big upset in general next season. I mean, you're still getting pretty good wins with Missouri and Kentucky, but in the end, I think South Carolina does have a chance to make a bowl game, and that's actually what I'm predicting. I think this team goes 6-6 next season, and I mean, it's going to be really tight though. I think that 6-win mark is going to be really tough for South Carolina to get to. I definitely think it's reachable. I mean, there are 6 very winnable games on the schedule. I mean, especially with having 3 really easy ones in Coastal Carolina, East Carolina, and Wofford. But I mean, in the end, it's still going to be pretty tough. I think South Carolina's going to need to show up every week in order to get that, to get that achievement. So, but yeah, once again, it's still a really tough schedule. I mean, I think next season this South Carolina team could face 5 teams in the top 10 at one point. I mean, I think Florida will definitely be a top team for the majority of next season. Same thing with Georgia, LSU, and Clemson. All 3 of those teams certainly should be in the top 10 when South Carolina is playing them, unless they face a big upset. But I mean, you could argue that for Tennessee and Texas A&M as well. I mean, both of those teams I expect to be top 15 teams next season. So, yeah, definitely a tough schedule for South Carolina, but I do expect them to make it to a bowl game, even though that happens. So, yeah, with that about wraps up our final prediction on South Carolina. If you enjoyed this schedule preview, be sure to slap a like on it, subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel, and I really appreciate that a ton. But once again, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I will see you all later.